You are born into a broken world, a world of chaos, pain, and moral decay. But buried in ancient stories is a message. Face your darkness, carry your burden, and strive upward. In this lecture, we explore the psychological depth of Genesis in the Sermon on the Mount and why your personal integrity might be the key to saving not just yourself, but the world.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into some really incredible source material. We've got excerpts from lectures looking at ancient texts, specifically Genesis and the Sermon on the Mount, but through this unique psychological and existential lens. Our mission really is to pull out the core insights these sources offer about, well, the human condition, right? The challenges we face, and maybe a surprising path to living a meaningful life. We want to make it practical for you.
Exactly. And these sources, they argue these ancient stories aren't just like relics. They connect them to fundamental truths about reality, about human nature, insights that really resonate today, maybe more than ever.
Okay, so let's get into it. The material hits you right away with this idea. We exist within and actually are damaged structures. And this isn't abstract. It's biological, sociocultural, inherited stuff.
That's right. And what's really emphasized is that this imperfection, this damage, it's a permanent feature of existence.
Sure.
The sources basically say, look, young people might feel cynical about the world, and understandably so, but taking this fundamental incompleteness personally, that's kind of a misunderstanding. Things have always been, well, incomplete.
It's a heavy place to start, isn't it? But interestingly, even with this damaged structure idea, the sources say there's still room for gratitude. Especially, they point out, if you live in a culture where things function, relatively well, compared to how bad it could be.
Right. It hasn't become pure hell, which is always a possibility, the sources remind us. So that raises the big question. If the structure's damaged, what's our role? And the argument is we actually bear responsibility because we don't constantly work to repair it. The positive meaning in life they propose comes from identifying where repair is needed in your walled city. That could be your mind, your room, your community.
Your relationships, yeah.
And then, sallying forth to fix it.
And this is where it gets really compelling for me. This inherent insufficiency, the fact that things aren't perfect. The source presents that as the thing that actually calls forth a kind of heroic adventure from us. There's no shortage of things near you right now that aren't quite right that you could fix if you wanted to. And they make this, well, pretty powerful proposition based on that. If you adopt the attitude of genuinely trying to make things better, wherever you are, however small,
Right.
then things will actually start to get better in your life in ways you might not expect. It's presented as something, surprisingly underexplored. There's that anecdote in the source, right? About the waiter at the keg.
Yeah.
He supposedly watched these lectures, applied the ideas, just took his job, his immediate environment, seriously, tried to improve things, and apparently got 2 promotions in, 4 months?
Yeah, it illustrates that point about incremental progress beautifully. The sources use the analogy of compound interest, but for life itself.
Yeah.
Making your life maybe just 0.1% better each week. Sounds tiny, right?
Yeah, barely anything.
But over time, especially if you start young, it leads to this, well, unimaginable transformation. It's posed as an open question, really.
Yeah.
Just how much better could things get if we consistently aimed at making them better?
And this connects right back to those foundational stories, like Cain and Abel. The analysis there is fascinating. It's like these 2 fundamental ways of being. Abel represents adopting responsibility, making sacrifices for the future, and things flourishing.
Right.
And Cain represents the other path. Resentment, bitterness, rejecting the whole setup, leading to destruction.
It's interesting, too, how the sources suggest we often kind of denigrate the opportunities right under our noses. They bring in Carl Jung, saying he suggested people miss the divine because they didn't look low enough. The idea is we overlook the majesty of being in our everyday reality, which is just inexhaustibly complex and full of potential. Any starting point, they argue, is potentially valid, though obviously terrible situations exist, but your attitude towards it can make things much, much worse.
So why don't people aim higher then? The sources suggest a core reason is this deep shame about our own flaws, our weaknesses. Like Adam hiding from God after the fall, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's part of it. And there are other negative motivations, too, like just wanting to avoid responsibility. Or sometimes, sadly, even actively wanting to make things worse out of spite or resentment. Which raises a really practical question, I think. Can you be in a really bad spot, difficult circumstances, and still move forward? And the sources say emphatically yes, if you're trying to make it better.
Okay.
The meaning isn't in escaping the suffering. It's in confronting the trouble and deciding to ameliorate it. Even if your actions seem tiny, trivial. Nothing done right is trivial, they argue. Genuine commitment pays off, even if not always how you expect.
Another huge obstacle they focus on is dishonesty. Just lying. They throw down this challenge. Stop saying things you know aren't true. The argument is you know when you're cheating by the rules of the game you are playing. You feel it.
Yeah, you have that internal sense.
And the archetype of Satan, in this view, is that ultimate arrogance. Believing you can twist reality, bend the rules without consequence. There's that really striking personal story from the source, isn't there, about realizing in their 20s that they were lying, like 95% of the time. Saying things they didn't really believe or hadn't properly thought through.
Right, and the process of stopping.
Yeah, just stopping saying things that made them feel weak or inauthentic meant they had to stop saying almost everything for months. Left them feeling, quote, mostly dead. A real shock.
And connecting that individual level back to the bigger picture, the sources link this kind of personal degeneration, this dishonesty and aiming down directly to the flood story in Genesis. The idea is the society, doesn't just fall apart on its own. It gets corrupted when enough people are actively aiming down. So the flood becomes this stark warning. Collective aiming down degenerates everything back towards chaos. And the sources really push this idea that our individual moral failures contribute significantly to the decay of the whole system, the cosmos. People sense this, they argue, deep down. It's uncomfortable, but we know it. Citing Jung again, the idea that the human shadow reaches all the way down to hell. It aligns with those destructive forces that want things to be terrible.
It's fascinating how you can see that pattern in Genesis, even though it's, like, fragmented after Cain. That story of the sons of God and daughters of men. The sources read it complexly. Heroes establishing order, yes, but also this relentless buildup of corruption. God's spirit won't strive with corrupt man indefinitely. The wickedness becomes great. Thoughts are only evil continually. That's heavy stuff.
And this is where the sources find real value in that old religious idea of acknowledging your own sin, your own potential for evil. Not for self-punishment, but as a call to stop breaking your own rules, to strive towards what you could be, recognizing that better potential within. They also warn against just relying on the intellect alone. Lucifer is the archetype of intellectual pride. Falling in love with its own brilliant ideas, which then leads down the path to totalitarianism, believing you have the perfect system.
So when you actually encounter real malevolence, the sources suggest, well, maybe ordinary language fails, those prison anecdotes are chilling. The seemingly normal guy who shot begging cops, the men who casually crushed someone's leg. It requires something more serious, maybe even a religious tone, because it's so far outside the norm. It's a shock to realize that monstrous capacity exists in others and potentially.
In yourself. That's the really confronting part. But Noah is presented as the alternative archetype, isn't he?
Right. He walked with God, unlike Adam, who hid.
And that mode of being, walking with that principle of good, of order, is what protects him from the chaos, from the flood. The argument is these ancient stories are intensely practical. They're teaching how to conduct yourself, how to build your ark, metaphorically speaking.
How to navigate the catastrophes that inevitably come.
Exactly. Personally or societally.
Which then leads the sources to pivot towards the Sermon on the Mount as maybe the most articulated guide for how to do that, how to walk with God in this practical modern sense. So let's unpack some of that. The famous lines like, consider the lilies of the field, or take no thought for the morrow. They're not interpreted as just, be a hippie.
No, not at all. The absolute core, the kicker, as the source puts it, is seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness.
And all these things shall be added unto you.
Right. And this is presented as a radical hypothesis about how reality works. If you genuinely aim at the highest possible good you can conceive, then the things you actually need to survive, to thrive, they will somehow manifest. But it requires, they say, a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. You can't just think about it. You have to act it out.
You have to do it to see if it's true for you.
Precisely. They claim it's the most effective way to operate, period. That image of Pinocchio wishing on a star is used as an analogy for aligning yourself with that highest conceivable good, aiming at that star.
So take no thought for the morrow isn't about being impractical.
No, it's about fixing your aim on that highest distant goal. And that act organizes your perceptions and motivations today. It makes the daily challenges meaningful because they're part of getting there.
Okay, that makes more sense. You can aim far off, but live intensely right now.
Exactly. And then there's judge not, that ye be not judged. That's presented less as advice, more as a description of reality.
How so?
You will be judged by the rules of the game you choose to play. Existence holds you accountable to your chosen framework.
So choose your game wisely. Choose rules you're willing to live by and be judged by.
That's the idea. Pick a way of being whose consequences you can accept.
Which connects to the moat and the beam thing, right? That's powerful.
Very powerful. And the emphasis is not on the other person's speck of dust, the moat.
It's on the massive log, the beam, in your own eye.
Right. Priority 1, figure out what's blocking your vision. What are you doing wrong? Leave other people alone on that front initially.
Don't just assume the problem is out there.
Exactly. Assume it's in here first.
I liked the personal anecdote about arguments, stepping back.
Yeah, stopping the fight, separating.
And asking, okay, what idiocy did I contribute here over the last, month?
Admitting your own part. Not necessarily blaming yourself entirely, but taking responsibility for your contribution.
And that apparently opened the door. Became two idiots who could actually talk.
Yeah. Resolving the impasse by acknowledging shared imperfection. Then ask, seek, knock. It's presented as a way to align yourself to get what would actually be good for you.
Which might be different from what I think I want.
Very possibly. The sources suggest we often fail because we don't really figure out what would be genuinely good and then aim for it, make the sacrifices. Actually wanting something requires reorienting your whole life towards it.
And asking means really wanting to know the answer. Consulting that inner conscience.
Yeah, that inner self, that Socratic daemon figure.
Yeah.
Genuinely being open to the answer, even if it's difficult.
So all these actions, seeking the kingdom, not ludging improperly, removing the beam, asking, seeking, knocking, they're all ways of acting out the proposition that if you align yourself properly, reality itself might prove benevolent.
That seems to be the core claim. You have to embody the hypothesis to test its truth for you.
Okay. And the golden rule interpretation was interesting too. Do unto others.
Yeah, drawing on Jung, they suggest flipping it first. First, figure out how your life could be truly great if you treated yourself properly with value and care.
Okay, start with self-responsibility and valuing yourself.
Right. Then, once you have that standard, extend that same courtesy, that same aim for the good to everyone else. It's presented as maybe the heart of moral wisdom.
And the narrow gate idea, the path of doing things right, is thin.
Very thin. Precariously balanced between chaos on one side and rigid dead order on the other.
Infinite ways to screw up.
Pretty much. But you can feel when you're on that path, they argue, that feeling of deep meaning where even mortality seems less terrifying.
That's your instinct saying you're in the right place.
Yeah, your deepest intuition. But it takes practice to stay there.
By their fruits you shall know them. That links back to the flood again.
Directly. A corrupt tree produces bad fruit. And the sources explicitly connect this to 20th century totalitarianism. Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Mao's China.
Saying that catastrophes grew from individual moral failures, dishonesty, corruption.
Yes. People becoming dead wood, lacking integrity. The warning is that dead wood burns when the fires come.
So hearing the sermon's words and doing them, that's building your house on the rock.
Exactly. Able to withstand the storm, the flood.
Just hearing, just intellectual understanding, that's building on sand. Collapse is inevitable.
Right. True authority comes from substance, from living it, not just repeating words like the scribes Jesus encountered. Which brings us back to Noah again. Saving not just himself, but potentially the world by acting properly.
Right.
And citing Solzhenitsyn. Individual honesty, individual ethical action is the only real defense against totalitarian creep.
Solzhenitsyn realized his own past complicity, right? That's powerful.
Immensely. It underscores that individual integrity isn't just personal, it's societal.
And then that maybe more speculative idea about Noah and the animals.
Yeah, the interpretation that proper individual action impacts the whole living planet.
Which feels incredibly relevant now. Get your own act together.
And it might be the best thing you can do for all of being. Redeeming the microcosm affects the macrocosm.
Wow. Okay. What about helping others, though? The sources seemed quite stark on that.
They are stark, basically.
Right.
You can't help someone who doesn't want to stop being lost. The best you can do often is get your life in order and be an example of an alternative reality.
Help by example.
Yeah. And knowing when to stop, The pearls before swine idea, don't keep offering help if it's being rejected or misused. It might even be harmful.
Sometimes you have to walk away from pathological situations, prioritize your own survival.
Like the lifeguard analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't let the drowning person pull you under, too. Sometimes you have to save yourself to be of any use at all. The sources also touched on that disconnect between, say, intellectuals and the working class.
Attributing some of it to intellectual arrogance?
Yeah, suggesting wisdom is different from just intelligence.
Yeah.
And emphasizing respect for honest labor like Christ the carpenter. Dishonesty shows up immediately in physical work.
A call for intellectuals to lose any sense of moral superiority.
Pretty much.
And they briefly touched on bigger geopolitical stuff, too. This idea of tyranny or nihilism as the core tension, suggesting Western nihilism might be a weakness that invites tyranny.
That's the source's framing, yeah. That a lack of shared meaning creates a vacuum that oppressive forces might fill. And they cite that observed alliance between some postmodern feminists and Islamofascists as a specific concerning example of this dynamic from their perspective.
Right, and important to stress, that's the source's specific provocative analysis we're reporting on here.
Absolutely. Presented neutrally as part of the material being discussed. Underpinning some of this is the Pareto distribution, or the Matthew principle.
To those who have, more will be given.
From those who have nothing, everything will be taken. That nonlinear reality of success and failure.
Small steps forward make the next steps easier, compounding upwards.
And small steps backwards, or even standing still, can lead to a rapid downward spiral. Zero is a hard place to climb out of.
Finally, they talked about truth. What it means to believe something, leaning towards pragmatism.
Yeah, truth validated by outcomes over time, especially in repeated interactions. The idea that our truth claims, spoken or lived, carry an ethic. And that ethic is proven true or false by whether it leads to sustainable, positive outcomes.
And they showed respect for other ancient traditions, too, beyond Christianity.
Definitely. Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Taoism, Norse. Seeing them as potentially compatible sources of deep wisdom. Needing careful study, not just, a superficial fast food mall approach to multiculturalism. Acknowledging Jung's work in bridging these psychologically.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, looking back over this deep dive, what emerges is this really powerful, maybe demanding framework. We're imperfect, the world's imperfect, damaged even, but that's not the end of the story.
No, it's the beginning. That imperfection is presented as the necessary ground for meaningful action, the call to heroism. And the path seems clear, if difficult. Aim high at the best good you can conceive. Be honest, starting with yourself in the smallest things. Take responsibility for your own life, the repair needed around you, and recognize the ripple effect.
On yourself, your relationships, maybe the whole world.
Potentially.
It feels like a call to heroic adventure, but found in the everyday. Navigating that narrow path between chaos and order, building your life on the rock of actually doing what you know is right. We've covered a lot of ground: ancient myths, modern psychology, personal truth, societal collapse. So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over, drawing straight from these sources. They argue that the challenges, the damage in the structure of our lives and world, they actually demand or call forth our potential for a heroic response. So what aspect of your own damaged structure, maybe in your mind, your home, your work, your community, what part of that is calling for your heroic adventure right now? Something to consider.